KaraokeBooks.
Family Happiness. Leo Tolstoy. Translated by Louise Maude, Aylmer Maude. Audiobook. Chapter 8. From that day there was a complete change in our life and our relations to each other. We were no longer as happy when we were alone together as before. To certain subjects we gave a wide berth, and conversation flowed more easily in the presence of a third person. When the talk turned on life in the country, or on a ball, we were uneasy and shrank from looking at one another. Both of us knew where the gulf between us lay, and seemed afraid to approach it. I was convinced that he was proud and irascible, and that I must be careful not to touch him on his weak point. He was equally sure that I disliked the country and was dying for social distraction, and that he must put up with this unfortunate taste of mine. We both avoided frank conversation on these topics, and each misjudged the other. We had long ceased to think each other the most perfect people in the world. Each now judged the other in secret, and measured the offender by the standard of other people. I fell ill before we left Petersburg, and we went from there to a house near town, from which my husband went on alone, to join his mother at Nikolskoye. By that time I was well enough to have gone with him, but he urged me to stay on the pretext of my health. I knew, however, that he was really afraid we should be uncomfortable together in the country, so I did not insist much, and he went off alone. I felt it dull and solitary in his absence, but when he came back, I saw that he did not add to my life what he had added formerly. In the old days every thought and experience weighed on me like a crime till I had imparted it to him. Every action and word of his seemed to me a model of perfection. We often laughed for joy at the mere sight of each other. But these relations had changed, so imperceptibly that we had not even noticed their disappearance. Separate interests and cares, which we no longer tried to share, made their appearance, and even the fact of our estrangement ceased to trouble us. The idea became familiar, and, before a year had passed, each could look at the other without confusion. His fits of boyish merriment with me had quite vanished. His mood of calm indulgence to all that passed, which used to provoke me, had disappeared. There was an end of those penetrating looks which used to confuse and delight me, an end of the ecstasies and prayers which we once shared in common. We did not even meet often. He was continually absent, with no fears or regrets for leaving me alone, and I was constantly in society, where I did not need him. There were no further scenes or quarrels between us. I tried to satisfy him, he carried out all my wishes, and we seemed to love each other. When we were by ourselves, which we seldom were, I felt neither joy nor excitement nor embarrassment in his company. It seemed like being alone. I realized that he was my husband and no mere stranger, a good man, and as familiar to me as my own self. I was convinced that I knew just what he would say and do, and how he would look, and if anything he did surprised me, I concluded that he had made a mistake. I expected nothing from him. In a word, he was my husband, and that was all. It seemed to me that things must be so, as a matter of course, and that no other relations between us had ever existed. When he left home, especially at first, I was lonely and frightened and felt keenly my need of support. When he came back, I ran to his arms with joy, though 2 hours later my joy was quite forgotten, and I found nothing to say to him. Only at moments which sometimes occurred between us of quiet undemonstrative affection, I felt something wrong and some pain at my heart, and I seemed to read the same story in his eyes. I was conscious of a limit to tenderness, which he seemingly would not, and I could not, overstep. This saddened me sometimes, but I had no leisure to reflect on anything, and my regret for a change which I vaguely realized I tried to drown in the distractions which were always within my reach. Fashionable life, which had dazzled me at first by its glitter and flattery of my self-love, now took entire command of my nature, became a habit, laid its fetters upon me, and monopolized my capacity for feeling. I could not bear solitude, and was afraid to reflect on my position. My whole day, from late in the morning till late at night, was taken up by the claims of society. Even if I stayed at home, my time was not my own. This no longer seemed to me either gay or dull, but it seemed that so, and not otherwise, it always had to be. So 3 years passed, during which our relations to one another remained unchanged and seemed to have taken a fixed shape which could not become either better or worse. Though 2 events of importance in our family life took place during that time, neither of them changed my own life. These were the birth of my first child and the death of Tatiana Semyonovna. At first the feeling of motherhood did take hold of me with such power, and produce in me such a passion of unanticipated joy, that I believed this would prove the beginning of a new life for me. But, in the course of 2 months, when I began to go out again, my feeling grew weaker and weaker, till it passed into mere habit and the lifeless performance of a duty. My husband, on the contrary, from the birth of our first boy, became his old self again, gentle, composed, and home-loving, and transferred to the child his old tenderness and gaiety. Many a night when I went, dressed for a ball, to the nursery, to sign the child with the cross before he slept, I found my husband there and felt his eyes fixed on me with something of reproof in their serious gaze. Then I was ashamed and even shocked by my own callousness, and asked myself if I was worse than other women. But it can't be helped, I said to myself. I love my child, but to sit beside him all day long would bore me, and nothing will make me pretend what I do not really feel. His mother's death was a great sorrow to my husband. He said that he found it painful to go on living at Nikolskoye. For myself, although I mourned for her and sympathized with my husband's sorrow, yet I found life in that house easier and pleasanter after her death. Most of those 3 years we spent in town. I went only once to Nikolskoye for 2 months, and the 3rd year we went abroad and spent the summer at Baden. I was then 21, our financial position was, I believed, satisfactory, my domestic life gave me all that I asked of it. Everyone I knew, it seemed to me, loved me, my health was good, I was the best dressed woman in Baden, I knew that I was good looking, the weather was fine, I enjoyed the atmosphere of beauty and refinement, and, in short, I was in excellent spirits. They had once been even higher at Nikolskoye, when my happiness was in myself and came from the feeling that I deserved to be happy, and from the anticipation of still greater happiness to come. That was a different state of things, but I did very well this summer also. I had no special wishes or hopes of fears. It seemed to me that my life was full and my conscience easy. Among all the visitors at Baden that season there was no one man whom I preferred to the rest, or even to our old ambassador, Prince K., who was assiduous in his attentions to me. One was young, and another old, one was English and fair, another French and wore a beard. To me they were all alike, but all indispensable. Indistinguishable as they were, they together made up the atmosphere which I found so pleasant. But there was one, an Italian marquis, who stood out from the rest by reason of the boldness with which he expressed his admiration. He seized every opportunity of being with me, danced with me, rode with me, and met me at the casino, and everywhere he spoke to me of my charms. Several times I saw him from my windows loitering round our hotel, and the fixed gaze of his bright eyes often troubled me, and made me blush and turn away. He was young, handsome, and well-mannered, and above all, by his smile and the expression of his brow, he resembled my husband, though much handsomer than he. He struck me by this likeness, though in general, in his lips, eyes, and long chin, there was something coarse and animal which contrasted with my husband's charming expression of kindness and noble serenity. I supposed him to be passionately in love with me, and thought of him sometimes with proud commiseration. When I tried at times to soothe him and change his tone to one of easy, half-friendly confidence, he resented the suggestion with vehemence, and continued to disquiet me by a smoldering passion which was ready at any moment to burst forth. Though I would not own it even to myself, I feared him and often thought of him against my will. My husband knew him, and greeted him, even more than other acquaintances of ours who regarded him only as my husband, with coldness and disdain. Towards the end of the season one fell ill and stayed indoors for a fortnight. The first evening that I went out again to hear the band, I learnt that Lady S., an Englishwoman famous for her beauty, who had long been expected, had arrived in my absence. My return was welcomed, and a group gathered round me, but a more distinguished group attended the beautiful stranger. She and her beauty were the one subject of conversation around me. When I saw her, she was really beautiful, but her self-satisfied expression struck me as disagreeable, and I said so. That day everything that had formerly seemed amusing, seemed dull. Lady S. arranged an expedition to ruined castle for the next day, but I declined to be of the party. Almost everyone else went, and my opinion of Baden underwent a complete change. Everything and everybody seemed to me stupid and tiresome. I wanted to cry, to break off my cure, to return to Russia. There was some evil feeling in my soul, but I did not yet acknowledge it to myself. Pretending that I was not strong, I ceased to appear at crowded parties. If I went out, it was only in the morning by myself, to drink the waters, and my only companion was M., a Russian lady, with whom I sometimes took drives in the surrounding country. My husband was absent. He had gone to Heidelberg for a time, intending to return to Russia when my cure was over, and only paid me occasional visits at Baden. One day when Lady S. had carried off all the company on a hunting expedition, M. and I drove in the afternoon to the castle. While our carriage moved slowly along the winding road, bordered by ancient chestnut trees and commanding a vista of the pretty and pleasant country round Baden, with the setting sun lighting it up, our conversation took a more serious turn than had ever happened to us before. I had known my companion for a long time, but she appeared to me now in a new light, as a well-principled and intelligent woman, to whom it was possible to speak without reserve, and whose friendship was worth having. We spoke of our private concerns, of our children, of the emptiness of life at Baden, till we felt a longing for Russia and the Russian countryside. When we entered the castle we were still under the impression of this serious feeling. Within the walls there was shade and coolness, the sunlight played from above upon the ruins. Steps and voices were audible. The landscape, charming enough but cold to a Russian eye, lay before us in the frame made by a doorway. We sat down to rest and watched the sunset in silence. The voices now sounded louder, and I thought I heard my own name. I listened and could not help overhearing every word. I recognized the voices. The speakers were the Italian Marquis and a French friend of his whom I knew also. They were talking of me and of Lady S., and the Frenchman was comparing us as rival beauties. Though he said nothing insulting, his words made my pulse quicken. He explained in detail the good points of us both. I was already a mother, while Lady S. was only 19, though I had the advantage in hair, my rival had a better figure. Besides, he added, Lady S. is a real grande dame, and the other is nothing in particular, only one of those obscure Russian princesses who turn up here nowadays in such numbers. He ended by saying that I was wise in not attempting to compete with Lady S., and that I was completely buried as far as Baden was concerned. I am sorry for her, unless indeed she takes a fancy to console herself with you, he added with a hard ringing laugh. If she goes away, I follow her. The words were blurted out in an Italian accent. Happy man. He is still capable of a passion, laughed the Frenchman. Passion, said the other voice, and then was still for a moment. It is a necessity to me, I cannot live without it. To make life a romance is the one thing worth doing. And with me romance never breaks off in the middle, and this affair I shall carry through to the end. Bon chance, mon ami, said the Frenchman. They now turned a corner, and the voices stopped. Then we heard them coming down the steps, and a few minutes later they came out upon us by a side door. They were much surprised to see us. I blushed when the Marquis approached me, and felt afraid when we left the castle and he offered me his arm. I could not refuse, and we set off for the carriage, walking behind me and his friend. I was mortified by what the Frenchman had said of me, though I secretly admitted that he had only put in words what I felt myself, but the plain speaking of the Italian had surprised and upset me by its coarseness. I was tormented by the thought that, though I had overheard him, he showed no fear of me. It was hateful to have him so close to me, and I walked fast after the other couple, not looking at him or answering him and trying to hold his arm in such a way as not to hear him. He spoke of the fine view, of the unexpected pleasure of our meeting, and so on, but I was not listening. My thoughts were with my husband, my child, my country. I felt ashamed, distressed, anxious. I was in a hurry to get back to my solitary room in the Hotel de Bade, there to think at leisure of the storm of feeling that had just risen in my heart. But me walked slowly. It was still a long way to the carriage, and my escort seemed to loiter on purpose as if he wished to detain me. None of that, I thought, and resolutely quickened my pace. But it soon became unmistakable that he was detaining me and even pressing my arm. Me turned a corner, and we were quite alone. I was afraid. Excuse me, I said coldly and tried to free my arm, but the lace of my sleeve caught on a button of his coat. Bending towards me, he began to unfasten it, and his ungloved fingers touched my arm. A feeling new to me, half horror and half pleasure, sent an icy shiver down my back. I looked at him, intending by my coldness to convey all the contempt I felt for him, but my look expressed nothing but fear and excitement. His liquid blazing eyes, right up against my face, stared strangely at me, at my neck and breast. Both his hands fingered my arm above the wrist. His parted lips were saying that he loved me, and that I was all the world to him, and those lips were coming nearer and nearer, and those hands were squeezing mine harder and burning me. A fever ran through my veins, my sight grew dim, I trembled, and the words intended to check him died in my throat. Suddenly I felt a kiss on my cheek. Trembling all over and turning cold, I stood still and stared at him. Unable to speak or move, I stood there, horrified, expectant, even desirous. It was over in a moment, but the moment was horrible. In that short time I saw him exactly as he was, the low straight forehead, that forehead so like my husband's, under the straw hat, the handsome regular nose and dilated nostrils, the long waxed mustache and short beard, the close-shaved cheeks and sunburned neck. I hated and feared him, he was utterly repugnant and alien to me. And yet the excitement and passion of this hateful strange man raised a powerful echo in my own heart. I felt an irresistible longing to surrender myself to the kisses of that coarse handsome mouth, and to the pressure of those white hands with their delicate veins and jeweled fingers. I was tempted to throw myself headlong into the abyss of forbidden delights that had suddenly opened up before me. I am so unhappy already, I thought. Let more and more storms of unhappiness burst over my head. He put one arm round me and bent towards my face. Better so, I thought. let sin and shame cover me ever deeper and deeper. J'avoue, Amy, he whispered in the voice which was so like my husband's. At once I thought of my husband and child, as creatures once precious to me who had now passed altogether out of my life. At that moment I heard Miem's voice. She called to me from round the corner. I came to myself, tore my hand away without looking at him, and almost ran after her. I only looked at him after she and I were already seated in the carriage. Then I saw him raise his hat and ask some commonplace question with a smile. He little knew the inexpressible aversion I felt for him at that moment. My life seemed so wretched, the future so hopeless, the past so black. When Miem spoke, her words meant nothing to me. I thought that she talked only out of pity, and to hide the contempt I aroused in her. In every word and every look I seemed to detect this contempt and insulting pity. The shame of that kiss burned my cheek, and the thought of my husband and child was more than I could bear. When I was alone in my own room, I tried to think over my position, but I was afraid to be alone. Without drinking the tea which was brought me, and uncertain of my own motives, I got ready with feverish haste to catch the evening train and join my husband at Heidelberg. I found seats for myself and my maid in an empty carriage. When the train started and the fresh air blew through the window on my face, I grew more composed and pictured my past and future to myself more clearly. The course of our married life from the time of our first visit to Petersburg now presented itself to me in a new light, and lay like a reproach on my conscience. For the first time I clearly recalled our start at Nikolskoye and our plans for the future, and for the first time I asked myself what happiness had my husband had since then. I felt that I had behaved badly to him. By why, I asked myself, did he not stoke me? Why did he make pretenses? Why did he always avoid explanations? Why did he insult me? Why did he not use the power of his love to influence me? Or did he not love me? But whether he was to blame or not, I still felt the kiss of that strange man upon my cheek. The nearer we got to Heidelberg, the clearer grew my picture of my husband, and the more I dreaded our meeting. I shall tell him all, I thought, and wipe out everything with tears of repentance, and he will forgive me. But I did not know myself what I meant by everything, and I did not believe in my heart that he would forgive me. As soon as I entered my husband's room and saw his calm though surprised expression, I felt at once that I had nothing to tell him, no confession to make, and nothing to ask forgiveness for. I had to suppress my unspoken grief and penitence. "What put this into your head?" he asked. "I meant to go to Baden tomorrow." Then he looked more closely at me and seemed to take alarm. "What's the matter with you? What has happened?" he said. "Nothing at all," I replied, almost breaking down. "I am not going back. Let us go home, tomorrow if you like, to Russia." For some time he said nothing but looked at me attentively. Then he said, "But do tell me what has happened to you." I blushed involuntarily and looked down. There came into his eyes a flash of anger and displeasure. Afraid of what he might imagine, I said with a power of pretense that surprised myself. "Nothing at all has happened. It was merely that I grew weary and sad by myself, and I have been thinking a great deal of our way of life and of you. I have long been to blame towards you. Why do you take me abroad, when you can't bear it yourself? I have long been to blame. Let us go back to Nikolskoye and settle there forever. Spare us these sentimental scenes, my dear," he said coldly. "To go back to Nikolskoye is a good idea, for our money is running short, but the notion of stopping there, forever, is fanciful. I know you would not settle down. Have some tea, and you will feel better," and he rose to ring for the waiter. I imagined all he might be thinking about me, and I was offended by the horrible thoughts which I ascribed to him when I encountered the dubious and shame-faced look he directed at me. He will not and cannot understand me. I said I would go and look at the child, and I left the room. I wished to be alone, and to cry and cry and cry.
If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the channel.